Joan of Arc, the teenage girl who led an army, then was burned by the men she saved. She was 17 years old, couldn't read or write, and had never held a weapon before in her life. Within a year, she'd broken a siege the French army had considered unwinnable and crowned a king. Within 2 years, the same country she'd saved handed her over to be burned alive, and the men who condemned her knew exactly what they were doing. By 1429, France had spent nearly a century locked in the 100 Years' War against England, a conflict that had reached a genuinely desperate low point for the French crown. With English forces controlling large portions of northern France and laying siege to the strategically vital city of Orléans, a siege many French military leaders privately believed could not realistically be broken given the overwhelming English position. Into this crisis arrived a peasant girl from the village of Domremy, claiming to have experienced religious visions instructing her to help the uncrowned French heir, Charles, reclaim his throne and drive English forces from French soil. What makes Joan's story genuinely remarkable, beyond the religious claims themselves, which historians generally treat as a sincere reflection of her own beliefs rather than attempting to adjudicate their literal supernatural validity, is the sheer improbability of what actually followed. An illiterate teenage girl with no military training or noble connections somehow secured an audience with Charles's court, reportedly convincing skeptical officials of her sincerity partly by correctly identifying Charles among his courtiers, despite him deliberately disguising himself among the crowd specifically to test her, a detail recorded in multiple contemporary accounts. Though historians note the full specifics of exactly how she accomplished this remain difficult to verify with complete certainty given the nature of surviving 15th century source material. Granted a small military force and placed alongside experienced commanders, Joan travelled to Orléans in 1429, and within days of her arrival, French forces broke the siege that had persisted for months, a dramatic reversal that, whatever its actual military explanation, is treated by both contemporary and modern historians as a genuine, significant turning point in the war, one that transformed Joan almost instantly from an unknown peasant girl into a nationally significant figure whose presence alone appeared to meaningfully affect French military morale and English confidence in equal measure. Joan's continued military involvement over the following months contributed to a series of additional French victories, ultimately leading to Charles's formal coronation as King Charles VII at Reims Cathedral in July of 1429, a coronation Joan had specifically identified as essential to legitimizing Charles's contested claim to the throne, and one she personally attended as a place of significant honor, having helped make it possible through her role in the preceding military campaign. Joan's fortunes shifted dramatically the following year when she was captured by Burgundian forces, French nobles allied with England during this specific period of the conflict, during a military engagement near Compiègne in May of 1430. Rather than being ransomed back to French forces, a common practice for captured nobility and military leaders during this era, Joan was sold to the English, who recognized her significant symbolic value and moved to have her tried not as a prisoner of war, but through an ecclesiastical trial specifically designed to destroy her credibility and, by extension, undermine the legitimacy of Charles's coronation that her actions had helped secure. The resulting trial, conducted by a church court operating under significant English political pressure and influence, focused heavily on charges of heresy, with prosecutors specifically fixating on Joan's practice of wearing men's clothing, both during her military campaigns and while imprisoned, a practice she maintained partly for practical protection against sexual assault, while held in a secular prison surrounded by hostile guards, but one prosecutors successfully framed as a violation of religious and social norms serious enough to constitute genuine heresy under the specific theological standards applied during her trial. Joan, still a teenager, facing experienced church prosecutors in a trial process specifically designed to produce a conviction, demonstrated a genuinely remarkable, well-documented degree of composure and rhetorical skill throughout the proceedings, with surviving trial transcripts showing her repeatedly parrying deliberately entrapping theological questions with responses historians and theologians have long noted as genuinely sophisticated for someone entirely without formal education, including her famous response when asked whether she believed herself to be in a state of God's grace, a question theologically designed so that either a yes or no answer could be used against her, to which she reportedly replied that if she was not, she prayed God would put her there, and if she was, she prayed God would keep her there, an answer that satisfied neither the theological trap nor gave her prosecutors the clear admission they needed. Despite this, Joan was ultimately convicted of heresy and burned at the stake in the marketplace of Rouen on May 30th, 1431, at approximately 19 years old. Her death carried out publicly and deliberately as a demonstration intended to permanently discredit both her and, by extension, the legitimacy of the French king whose coronation she had helped secure. What makes Joan's story endure as a particularly striking historical injustice isn't simply the tragedy of her execution itself, but what followed in the decades afterward. Charles VII, the King Joan had personally helped crown, made no meaningful effort during her trial or execution to intervene on her behalf, a political calculation historians generally attribute to his precarious position and reluctance to be seen directly challenging church authority during an already unstable period of his reign. It wasn't until 1456, 25 years after her execution and only after Charles's political position had become considerably more secure, that a formal posthumous retrial, conducted this time under papal authority, formally overturned her original conviction, declaring her innocent of all charges and effectively acknowledging that her original trial had been a politically motivated act of injustice rather than a legitimate religious proceeding. Joan of Arc was eventually canonized as a Catholic saint in 1920, nearly 5 centuries after her death, a final, formal historical vindication that arrived considerably too late to matter to the teenage girl who had been burned alive by the same political and religious systems whose legitimacy her own actions had helped secure. If stories like this, where history's most remarkable figures were destroyed by the very forces they helped save, are exactly what you come here for, subscribe to The Grave Details, because history holds more stories like this than most people will ever know.